Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap. I'm really excited about this topic. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, just know you'll be able to access it later on demand. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of today's webinar. And also, we are going to have a couple of polls during today's webcast. So please, we invite you to be as interactive as possible and participate in the polls. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is DevOps for highly regulated environments. Our speaker today is Bill Manning, who is Senior Solution Engineer at JFrog. Hey, Bill, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good today. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. We do have two polls that we want to do. First of all, do you want to tell the audience about yourself and then we'll do the polls, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. So,
Okay.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, I'm Bill Manning, as stated. I work at JFrog. We are the Universal Binary Repository Manager. We'll talk about that as a product line and what we actually do as a company. If you're not an Artifactory user or you never heard the name JFrog, if I ever say the word Artifactory, most of the people go, oh yeah, we use that. And we do have a large footprint in the DevOps space. Today we're going to be also just talking about how to utilize things such as metadata, best practices, and other components of your SDLC and DevOps, and move forward. And as stated, like I said, I'm Bill. And I'm looking forward to doing this today, so we'll let the poll take away, and then we'll get kicked off into the actual session itself.
Awesome. Well, the first poll is going out right now. It should be on your screen. The poll is, do you consider your company to be in a highly regulated industry? Simple yes or no. We'll give you guys a couple seconds here to make your selection, and then we'll push out the second poll, and then we'll let Bill do his thing. So we are looking forward to today's webinar, definitely. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and then we'll push out the next one. And then let's see. Here comes the next poll, which is, which field or industry are you in? Select one of the following: medical, government, financial, aeronautics, or other. So go ahead and make your selection. Again, we will give you guys a couple seconds to do that, and then close it out, and Bill, you will be able to take it away at that point. But let's give it about 10 more seconds and make sure that as many people are able to do the poll as possible. Okay, all right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close it, and you should be able, there we go. There's the slides back. I'm going to put myself on mute and let you get right to it, Bill.
Okay, great. I'm trying to find, there it is. All right, so today we're going to be talking about SDLC and highly regulated environments. Yeah, it's a little early here in the morning. Let's get prepared to talk about this. As stated, I'm Bill Manning. You can look up jfrog.com and see what we offer as a product line. My Twitter handle is William Manning. If you have any feedback or want to discuss anything, please let me know. First thing I want to kick off is what we're going to discuss today. First of all, what exactly is a highly regulated environment? We'll go through some examples of this. We're also going to talk about binaries. Since my company deals with binaries, of course, we're going to focus on some of that because there's a lot of interesting features around binaries that a lot of people seem to generalize and misunderstand. Also, too, we're going to be talking about air gapping, which is definitely a huge factor behind this, especially when you get into certain industries. And we're going to talk about DevSecOps and also two ways in which you can actually utilize different standards and how to actually accomplish meeting those standards for those industries themselves. Now, as stated, I'll just give a quick industry overview of who we are. With JFrog, we are the leader basically in the DevOps space in terms of binary management. And when I talk about binary management, as you'll see in my discussion, I'm not just talking about those third-party transitive dependencies that every developer uses. I'm also talking about the builds you create. And we're going to talk about how utilizing products like ours or other products, it's up to you. Of course, I work for JFrog, so I am going to talk about our product itself. But how to utilize that information to comply to those standards. We always look at a unified approach, and at JFrog, the whole thing is with DevOps. We look at everything from the end-to-end solution, as I like to say, from developer to deployment. We're part of the whole CI/CD movement. We also anticipate hybrid and multi-cloud offerings, and we also integrate with numerous offerings out there, from all the major CI/CD platforms down to various package types. And then when we talk about being radically universal, that's the biggest thing. Is that we take on package types to store not only those transitives but the builds themselves in a very native format. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. We have tons of information on our JFrog YouTube page if you'd like to go in and learn more. But let's focus on the topic at hand. We offer an end-to-end platform, of course, and when we offer this end-to-end platform, what we like to talk about, like I said, is from developer to deployment. Everything from storing the binaries and the builds down to scanning them, which will be part of the discussion we have today with our X-Ray product, being able to handle multi-site integrations and multi-site deployments, meaning that if you're a global organization, you're probably going to have multiple locations where you are doing development. And it'd be nice to be able to share things that are actually pre-approved in a regulated environment across multiple sites and locations, making sharing easier. We'll also talk about a little bit about CD and how you can actually use our distribution product and our edge nodes for more of a roll your own style CDN. We're also going to talk about ATO, which is authentication, authorization to operate. We'll also talk about ACLs, and that's part of our access product. That gives you the ability to actually synchronize users, groups, permissions, and access tokens. So this way you're always in control of who and what has access to your binaries and why that matters. Our ecosystem is pretty substantial. We are platform agnostic. We actually like to work with all the various providers of DevOps tools on the market and DevSecOps tools. So like I said, always keep us in mind when you're looking for your binary needs. Now, if we've all been in the industry long enough and we know about DevOps and DevSecOps, then obviously this feels like a very normalized thing. Watching the world burn around you while trying to solve problems with production or issues that you might be having with application deployment and development. It'd be better off if we were all sitting around and doing this and just watching and waiting for something to happen as opposed to putting out fires as it happens. As stated, today we are going to be talking about highly regulated environments. And this is the pure definition of what a highly regulated environment is. And going forward, I'm just going to refer to it as HRE. It's much easier to say, and I won't triple my tongue as much. So what we have here is, basically, a highly regulated environment can be anything from, things that are either government or industry regulated, things like RBAC, like I mentioned before, ATO. If you're familiar with ATO, making sure that you have the right permission sets when you are deploying out, say, your web services or any other sort of content you're delivering to the market. We also talk about encryption and digital signatures as being part of it. These are all kind of generalized, things that you will find in each one of the industries that I'll discuss today. And we're going to be focusing a lot on, what you can do to make sure you attribute to adhering to the standards for the various things that you're in. And a lot of that, what we'll talk about is, process and policies and audit tracking, metadata management, record management, and also validation. I think these are all important factors to keep in mind, and they're, like I said, generalized across the industries. But there are problems, and when you have problems, it can do things that can be adverse to your organization. Air gapping environments is typically slow. There's usually a manual process for vetting out those, say, third-party dependencies that your developers depend on. It can be very tedious. You can also get, the approval process is slow. Communication between teams sometimes is lacking. Gated SDLC processes can cause delays in releasing things to your environment. You want to have a place also that maybe you don't have a centralized place. A lot of companies I talk to, I might ask them where they store their builds, and they're like, we have an NFS that we share amongst the company, or things like that. Also, too, when you have the criteria for acceptance, one of the problems that they run into is that every segment has its own set of criteria, and how do you attribute to that, and how do you actually quantitate that so that you always have that information available to your developers and your release managers? And also, when you get back into the lifecycle idea, the idea of having traceability and having audit behind it to ensure that things that you've done are also able to be monitored, managed, and also have report driven, which is a big thing. What we're going to talk about is some ideal goals that everybody wants to do. I mean, nobody wants to be the slow factor. Nobody wants to have the turtle in the race, even though the end result is the same as the hare. But the problem is that velocity is king in a lot of release management, right? How fast is too fast? So the thing is that going back and looking at your organization and looking at ways to improve and increase the velocity. How do you automate as much as possible? Putting in automation for certain components behind this will allow you to operate faster. So we're going to talk about things around DevOps and how you can, plan and build better, identify the gaps, using metadata to, make better decisions and processes, and then determining tools. Like I said, I'm going to be using, of course, my product that I represent today as one of the tools that we're going to be talking about, but every organization is different. So always keep that in mind, that take everything I say today with a grain of salt, because it may not directly apply to you, but it could apply to you if it's manipulated a little bit and maybe function towards what you guys do. So let's first talk about examples of regulation, but I do believe that they're going to do a quick poll in between here, if I'm correct.
You are correct. So let's go ahead and throw out this third poll. Here it is. How confident are you in your company's DevOps best practices for a highly regulated environment? You're right. You do trip over your tongue saying that so many times, highly regulated environment. Select one of the following. Very confident, in implementation, maturing, or not at all. So go ahead and make your choice. Then we have 2 more quick polls after this one, and then I promise Bill will get right into his presentation and I will just shut up until the question and answer period starts. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this poll and get to the next one here. And hold on. There we go. All right, the next polling question is going out now. Which DevOps tools are you currently using? Select all that apply. So you've got 4 choices there: CI/CD, security tools, artifact repos, or other. So go ahead and make your choices for those. And wow, got a lot of people answering this question, which I like a whole lot. So hopefully there's at least 2 that are on that list that you're using. Okay, I'm going to give you guys about 5 more seconds, and then we'll throw the last polling question up and let you guys answer that, and then let Bill get back to it. Okay, I'm going to close this one now. And here comes that final polling question. What would you consider as the major obstacles to DevOps implementation in your industry? And you can check all that apply. Lack of standards, regulatory compliance issues, budget constraints, too many tools to integrate, or that ubiquitous other. So go ahead and make your choices there. And we'll give you guys a couple more seconds. Yeah, everybody loves other because, it's like blaming something else entirely. So, all right. 5 more seconds and then we'll close it out for 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm closing it out and it's back to you, Bill.
Great, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. So as stated, I'm not going to go in detail into each one of these examples that I'm about to talk about because it's really not the point. I mean, if you're in these industries, you understand what they are, what these compliance issues are. I'm just using it more as an emphasis point to talk about, all the things that, you have to think about. I mean, if it wasn't bad enough trying to keep things operational, if it wasn't bad enough trying to make sure that you're meeting your KPIs, if it wasn't bad enough that you're trying to get all the features that your users desire, even internally in these highly regulated environments, you also have to keep in mind, that there are the people out there, the legal experts, to make sure that you're adhering to these compliance rules. You're going to have your release managers who have to actually talk to the compliance officers to make sure that it's all compliant. And then the dreaded lawyers, when they get involved, that's always fun, right? We've all, probably a majority of us at some point have been asked to supply some information for some sort of compliance violation. It's bound to happen. Nobody's perfect, obviously. And some of my examples will show such. So first of all, software development responsibility. I pulled this from a report from 2017. I always talk about it, that, the big thing is that, we talk about integrations, and I'm going to talk about not just integrations from, say, third-party vendors. I just use this as an emphasis point to also talk about third-party binaries and, say, like OSs and, other things like that. But basically, talk about, that mental responsibility that every developer, every DevOps engineer, every DevSecOps engineer has to keep in the back of their mind, because it's their responsibility to ensure that things that they're doing are not, going to cause, financial loss, or when we're talking about here, even death. These industries are regulated for a reason. The first one we're going to talk about, of course, is financial and banking. This is an obvious one. I mean, we all know the issues with, certain financial institutions, say like Equifax, 147 million records being leaked, or, how many times have you read about a breach around data, or, things like that. And the thing is that all these compliance components are in here. I mean, let's talk about Sarbanes-Oxley. I mean, the separation between your development and your production. If you're looking at a true CI/CD environment, you're looking to operate in a full, DevSecOps manner, and that immediately right there, inhibits your velocity as an organization moving forward. Making sure between US and banking and APAC, if you're a global organization, having to balance between all these global rule sets that you have, especially along financing. The biggest things, though, that you could take away from all, the information, all those various kind of regulations that's instituted by these industries is the fact, traceability, security and privacy, portability of data. These are all the things. I mean, license governance. One of the things I'm going to demonstrate today, and I'm going to talk about is that when we get into that DevSecOps mentality and ensuring, having security as part of this, adhering to the regulations, is the idea of license compliance and third-party resources. And I'll get into that about how liability in a lot of these industries is a key factor, and that all those transitive dependencies you have, how do you ensure that they all have the proper licensing, that meets the requirement? Also, having segregations of duty and network isolation, there's many factors in here. And like I said, since I am going to be focusing more on the binary side, this is really the input and the output of DevSecOps. This is the essential factors that really bring in things into financing. Us as a company, we have the majority of the largest financial institutions in the world that are actually utilizing Artifactory for their internal processes and their internal development. We are a subject matter expert in this field because of that. Of course, we're also going to talk, I want to talk a little bit about medical and healthcare. Since this is a little bit of, limited time talk, we only have about 50 minutes in total. I don't want to dive too deep into it. But when we start talking about medical and health, we're not just talking about, health records. We're talking about things like medical devices. They run on software also. One of the things we talk about at Artifactory, at JFrog, about what we do is liquid software, right? And the whole idea of being able to do that, but it's kind of hard when you get into these, medical industries or any of these other regulated industries, and how to utilize it and make sure that you're not releasing things that will cause problems, especially say to a heart monitor or an insulin pump, right? Because we like to say also too is that every company is a software company. And that's true. I mean, you'd be surprised how many industries out there that you would never even configure. If you ever got a chance to look at our customer list, you'd be surprised at how many companies out there are what they are. And we work with a bunch of these medical and device companies that utilize us to distribute their firmware. Like I said, not just medical records. And one of the problems also too with all these industries that I'll also get into is people. High turnover rates, right? Handoffs, contractors, a lot of the industry, people are in and out all the time. And when it comes to medical specifically, being able to vet those engineers to make sure that they understand the compliance standards is a big deal. We're going to be talking about this industry. We talk about e-health, right? That's more along the lines of, anything having to do with patient data. Of course, you have mHealth, which is all about apps and regulation and mobile devices and things like that. And of course, we get into genomics, which is also too, having people's DNA information and things like that, or patient diagnosis or anything like that is, highly regulated. But in terms of software, it's not the data that you're actually storing, because those should be stored under those manners, under encryption and all that. It's actually how they're transmitted, how that information is actually handled inside the application, and ensuring that those third-party resources you're using to develop the applications around this are safe and secure and not going to cause a breach of that medical data itself. We talk about EU regulations, APIs, having access level controls and protection, SSL, all those things. And we're going to talk about one of our products today also, at JFrog, which is things around third-party binaries. Like I said, how do you ensure that you're not going to leak somebody's private medical data to the world? And these regulations are built for a reason, because let's face it, one wrong misstep in one of the libraries you use could actually kill somebody. And would you like to have that weigh heavy on your heart, that your little 5-minute extra shortcut cost somebody to die? Yeah, that sounds pretty morbid. I realized that was really a down note I just went on there. So let's continue. Oh wait, here's even more down notes. Oh great, I'm really I'm really batting 1,000 here. Anyway, let's talk about the aerospace and aviation industry, right? Here's an example. Software glitch cost 157 people their lives, right? I mean, it's the responsibility of everybody that's involved in SDLC. From the time that those, the marketing people get their hands in the mix to say this is what people want, the time the product managers have to go through and look at, the feature sets they're doing, they have to keep the responsibility of making sure that it doesn't bypass, any of the offering of security and dependency and resiliency that they offer as a product line, down to the developers actually taking the shortcuts and choosing libraries that might be susceptible to issues. And just the more scary facts is that things like the national aerospace system actually has a scale for software, and the scale they have for software is if you look at level A, the whole thing is it's catastrophic, multiple fatalities. That's the way they actually earmark some of the information in which, when they are looking at going through compliance on this, that, is there an issue? Will this issue actually cause loss of life or discomfort as hazardous? Will it cause physical damage to individuals? Or in this case, capital, meaning planes. The big focus in the aerospace industry is redundancy. So making sure that all the components that are utilized during the creation of the software that's implemented, whether it's the FAA and how they track planes, down to the pressure monitors inside the plane or altimeters, it's all affected. Everything is symbiote, and that's always one way to keep things in mind. And of course, the dreaded last one, which is government. No one ever wants to talk about government regulations, because the thing is that there's so many. This is just this is not even a fraction of what's actually with government industries. Everything there, and even developing inside of a government agency can be painful. Determining rights, looking at liability, turnover rates, contractors, metadata that's around that should be utilized to quantitate how things are going. I mean, this is the money that the people of countries are spending for the development of tool sets, whether they're the smallest tool sets of tracking people entering buildings down to, tracking any sort of nefarious people that are out in the world. It's all part of it, right? And there's always the argument between commercial off-the-shelf and open source software. And air gapping is a huge thing. But like I said, these are just to touch on components of the industry. Every industry has regulation, and of course, the highly regulated are always the harshest. But how do you actually do things, right? What are your options? Where do you actually get a chance to sit back? How do you, ensure security and safety and liability resources when that's, sacrificing your velocity? How do you actually make sure that you have all the proper data to adhere to those regulations? There's lots of how-dos, right? There's lots of those kind of things, and there's many different solutions in every one of these aspects. But today I'm only going to focus on a few. And I understand that probably a lot of you out there have your own thoughts and ideas on this. These are a mixture of opinions and also just the knowledge base that we have from our customer base, which is pretty vast. But let's get started. And of course, I want to focus first on binary management. And when I talk about binary management, I talked about it a little in the beginning, which is, I talk about, third-party dependencies, those FOSS items, those free and open source libraries that we look to depend on. I'm going to also talk about release storage and why that's important, because say down the line, you're going through and there is an issue, and some of the regulations are, an incident happened on this date. You need to attribute what happened on that date, what happened in that particular release. We're also going to talk about why metadata rules. And the thing is that metadata is king. I always emphasize that in a lot of the talks that I give. I'm also going to talk about how you can automate as much as possible. Having that metadata really influences those controls that you have in place, whether it's from moment one of just, from the developer all the way down to the release of the finalized product. Metadata allows you to track, trace, see who has their hands in it, who gave approvals, where did it actually go through the process, and things like that. I'm also going to discuss air gapping. In a lot of instances, a lot of these corporations, that you're not even allowed to have a cell phone inside your development organization, such as government. No cameras, no cell phones, no outside influence. But how do you get your developers to operate properly? How do you ensure that those binaries and those things that they need to perform their job are actually safe and secure? And how do you get it and make it easier for those developers to get what they need and actually improve the velocity of them getting it? You're going to hear me say velocity a lot because I think that's the biggest thing that drives our industry. And we're going to talk about SS level controls, as a big thing around this. And now I'm not going to talk about authorization to operate. I'm not going to talk about ATOs. Yes, that's a big thing, but that really falls more on the operation side. And it's a little bit outside the binary management, but understanding who has authentication and an ability to actually do that is a big thing. Now also, how do you also ensure that consistency? Whenever I talk about our product line and when I show it off, I always say that it's a consistency engine, meaning that it allows you to have multiple developer groups around the world, multiple instances, being able to share the binaries, those third party, the binaries you release, and have people operate more effectively, so you don't get the whole, my team has built something, the other team picks it up 24 hours later, and they have to go back and recompile. They can always use the same build, making sure that all the binaries are approved, and especially in an air-gapped environment, instead of having to have all these other locations come in and try to go in and download the same binaries. We'll talk about that, but it's all about consistency. And then last but not least is your place in the DevSecOps world. So first of all, let's talk about open source and compliance, right? Remember, the code you guys operate is, 90% of it is open source components, whether it's access to an API, whether it's libraries, if you're working in a cloud native environment such as Docker, or if you're working in VMs or orchestration, any sort of like deployment scalable architecture, the thing is that you rely on other sources, right? And we'll talk about libraries. I'm going to also show you some examples actually coming from this is like, how do you know that these things that you trust, should you? And we'll talk about how you can vet that. But the thing is remember, your code is only about 10%, maybe 20% of what you're actually releasing, as everything else is dependencies. One of the things you need to keep in mind is that when you're looking at this is, the need for assessment, right? Look at the licensing, look at the scope. One of the things I'm going to show you in here is blast radius. Maybe you do find something and you have multiple product lines and they depend on, say, one common core library that's shared across. Say you find an issue with that library, how do you get a blast radius to figure out what other product lines you have are being influenced or affected by that? Also, too, I want to talk about how you can automate most of this, so this way you don't, end up in that conundrum of having to wait for people to process things. Providing that end-to-end coverage, that developer deployment scale. When we talk about components, before I show you what I'm exactly talking about and how you can utilize metadata, and like I said, I'm going to give examples of our product is, everything is like a giant Russian doll, right? And everything's encapsulated in everything else. When you start looking at the application layer, what does this layer contain? If you're using a container, and you're hosting, say, the application in the container, is this container safe? If it's microservices, is one microservice more, susceptible to another, than another, based on the fact that it might have some sort of code it's using or some sort of third-party compliance tool that might influence something that is actually, vulnerable to, your system. So let me show you some examples behind this. Now, I'm going to show you, of course, I'm going to talk about our Artifactory product. And, I hope you guys can see what I'm showing on the screen. Okay. Here's an example I want to show you. And actually what I'll also do is I will bring up and show you how I actually built this. And while that's loading, of course, there we go, is I want to talk about, automating processes. In my case, I'm actually building a Docker container, right? I'm hosting an application. I've got a web service that I'm building. I'm pulling down dependencies. In this case, these are actually prior builds that I'm storing in Artifactory. I'm actually building my container. I'm actually using our X-ray product to deploy it and scan it to make sure there's nothing nefarious inside. And then I'm actually going through and I'm promoting it through my SDLC process. In this case, I'm promoting this Docker container from staging to production if I'm satisfied with the results. Now, if I were to look at what this actual job produces, is of course, I've got those, I should actually be logged into the product. That probably might be a nice idea. So let's get back and show that again. Let me go back and show you, here's that build I produced. But in Artifactory, here's everything I'm producing. In my case, I'm using our Artifactory product as a secure Docker registry. Now, why would I use this instead of, say, a standard one? I'm not trying to do a product pitch too much here, but of course I'm going to use what I know. And in this case, you can see all the artifacts I'm producing. These are all those container layers. If you're familiar, I like showing off Docker as an extreme example behind this because there are many pieces that make it up. Here's the example of the actual layers themselves. I can also go show you, I have dependencies that I'm pulling in. As I mentioned during my build process, I have, in this case, I've got a Node.js front end and I've got a Java backend. I can also, here's more information around it. Say I need to figure out how was this container constructed, right? In normal instances, it'd be really hard for me to capture that build information, but this is information that in a lot of the regulations in the industry, you need a base point. You need the ability to go in and see how this was constructed. So you can make sure that even if you're using something to construct something else, maybe that version has susceptibility to it. So you can see here, I've got like environmental and system information on how this was created. This is metadata that's key. Of course, I can look at the licensing, but say I have a failure. One of the classes that I talk about, that I give, is the fact is I have two containers. One operates, one does not operate. And how do I know what actually caused that issue between those containers? They look virtually identical. They operate virtually identical, except that one doesn't. And the thing is that how do I have a jump point for that? So for me storing this information in here, I can review the differences between two containers. That's why I use this as my registry. I can see what's changed at the artifact level. I can see what's changed at the dependency level. But the important part is the environmental and system information. I give the example where I show that I have a Java application, and I change the Java runtime that is actually in that container. And the difference between them is that the function that I call in my Java application is deprecated in the previous version. But the only way I would know that is to go in, and it would take me hours to figure out that information on why. And in here, I could actually have a jump point for that remediation. Now, we talked about traceability also. So one of the things that I like about this, and like what I like to do is that I showed you that in the step that I have here, I've got a piece here that says promotion. Now, part of what we do is you can actually design your repositories where you store your binaries to match your SDLC. You could create repositories for development. You could create repositories for QA and testing. You can create repositories for staging and release and have different ACLs. So now we're going into the ACL model. So I can actually adjust at every phase that I have during this build process. I can say who has access and who doesn't, and what level of access they have. In addition to that, I can also give you every phase in which I went through, and I actually was utilizing this for my release. I can say every phase, this is where it lives. And once again, I can change its objective permission based on who has access to that. But how do I know the contents of this container? And this is where we're going to start getting into DevSecOps in a minute, but I want to show you an example of this one. Now, this one, I will tell you, my containers are horrible. And what I'm going to show you right now is actually, I have an analysis of this container. How do you know the contents of your container? That's always the question, right? And in my case, I'm going to show you the contents of this container from every level. Now, this one has over almost I think what, over 2,100 issues. Yes, I design horrible things for my examples. Here's all the violations. Here's all the security risks that I have. I can also, from license compliance, that's actually a big thing. Liability lies in the hands of the application creators. And how do you ensure that you're not downloading a license that's going to say, hey, by the way, anything you develop using our product is you have to release open source, or you have to attribute to us in some way. How do I know where things are being stored? In my case, I can trace this entire container through the process. In addition to that, I can also, in our case with our X-ray product, I can actually show you even at every layer. So this is a trusted Ubuntu Docker container I'm hosting my application on. I chose this because I trust it. But obviously, when I'm looking in here, I have violations. These are actually base level components. Do you trust that container? And how do you know? So by using tools like Artifactory and our X-ray product, we actually can dive deep into those files and look around and show you. I mean, being able to view these components in their individual life, I can see in here that all the issues that came with this base level content of the container. I can also show you the blast radius in which it's being affected. So just to kind of show you that there is metadata tools out there, whether you use us or somebody else, I don't really care. I mean, obviously, I'd like for you to use us because I like working here. But obviously, the thing is, though, is knowing, and how do you know what to trust? How do you know what to use? And that's always the key factors that you run into. Even down to this, and this is always one that I love showing off. Is I'll show you right now. Struts. This is the infamous one. If I go in and show you, say this one right here. If you guys know anything about scary things, this is a scary thing. This is the one that actually caused a certain company to release 140 million private records. This is the issue right here. And I talked about blast radius. I can go in, and if I found this, and my team is the one that's doing this as part of our compliance, I can go notify other teams that they've run into an issue. So, here again, understanding how I can actually contribute to other teams that I talk to and give them the proper information that they need to do their job. One of the things we also talk about at our company here is the fact that those third-party dependencies, right? Those third-party dependencies that that all developers work on. So one of the things I want to show off here is that we actually can store those third-party dependencies in Artifactory. And there's that whole shift left mentality of DevSecOps. So with our X-ray product and our repository manager, you can actually pre-vet binaries before they're actually even being utilized by developers. So that could be your frontline defense. So don't let them into your walls before the assault happens. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Get off my little high horse there for a minute. And let's talk about the next part of this, right? Airgapped. We actually have a solution for it because most of it's sneakerware, let's face it, right? You need to put in a request for a third-party resource. You need to have it pre-vetted and approved and scanned. As I mentioned, with Artifactory, you can always use us as an example. Put one in the ZMZ, throw in a little X-ray in there, pre-vet the binaries, produce a report. If it does meet your criteria, you can automate the process by having that data checklist and then promote it through the system and then share it internally, meeting your air-gapped environment without having to have somebody grab a USB key and run from one computer to another to introduce it into your environment. Automate, automate, automate. You'll hear me say that a lot. The last thing I want to talk about, because I am starting to run out of time, is the scary scenario. This is one of my favorite ratios I have out there. Most organizations are like this. You have for every 100 developers, there's 10 operations people and 1 security. I give a talk with one of our fellow people here, and one of the talks we give a joke about is I've got an organization with 10,000 developers. I've got 2,000 operation engineers, and I have 6 security officers. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, in highly regulated environments, coordination and usage is usually a key factor, and actually coordinating between those teams can always be a hardship. So how do you do things to make things better? So first of all, you definitely always have to keep in mind, you want safety and security for your business, right? Loss of revenue, loss of information, the fact of trust is the biggest thing. Money can be recouped, things like that, but trust is a real hard thing to get back. We do rely a lot on third-party licensing and third-party software. That's what the sec part is of the DevOps, movement. It used to be an afterthought. Now it's an imperative. You need to keep that in place. I mean, look at companies like Equifax, Namaria, Facebook. I mean, all of them, breaches everywhere. If you follow something like Credit Karma or a lot of these other ones, there's daily breach reports. Discovering vulnerabilities before they become an issue. One of the things we talk about, and I'm going to show in I showed in one part of the example is the idea of shift left. It's a philosophical change in the way you develop. Putting the resources at the ROI, cheapest place in ROI, start at the developer level. Make sure that you put those in, as part of it, implement it, through the entire process, all the way down before you even release your product. Like I said, it's an imperative, not an afterthought anymore. Look at the industry. It's a $5 trillion industry, and that's just spending on everything should be consolidated, brought together. And like I said, it's information technology of course runs the world now. Metadata, releases, breaches. I mean, everybody knows this. This is nothing new. But here you go. Daily, this is since 2013. I mean, that's a pretty terrifying thing. But here's the thing, is that this information isn't just that 10% that the developer did, where you're looking at things like SQL injection or any of the typical, static code analysis things that you could find with static code analysis tools. A bunch of these were actually done because of breaches in third-party libraries, like I showed with the, with that struts issue. It's a common struts library. That was used by, used by millions and millions of developers to produce, applications. It's, basically, if you ever want, go to the breach level index. It's a very fascinating and terrifying site. One of our partners is RBS, Risk-Based Security. I mean, this is just the beginning of 2019, right? Vulnerabilities that they found since the beginning, since January 1st, 16,133 vulnerabilities, right? I mean, they supply us with the the CVE and CVS NVD information we use for our product lines. So I always like going in there and looking to see what they actually offer in terms of information. And like I said, these are pretty scary numbers. And we're as developers. I mean, my background, I've been doing this for, obviously you can see from my picture, I've got a lot of gray hair, so I've definitely got some years under my belts. And the thing is that knowing what you're using, using something just because it solves an issue, yes, that's one, but there's always something lurking in the shadows. And how do you make sure that the thing that's the be-all, end-all savior of your application development team is safe and secure? That's always the question, right? And it's something that you as a developer, as DevOps, need to keep in mind as a regulator and things like that. But there are solutions to make sure that you have velocity without stifling innovation. So the whole thing that comes down to is it's no longer security and compliance is someone else's issue, right? Discovering threats are expensive, especially if you go towards the later part of your SDLC process. So you have 1,000 developers, and those 1,000 developers developed features based on a vulnerable library that you're utilizing. You discovered this library as you're going into staging, and suddenly you've got to go back and rework it to pull out that library and find an alternative. That's costly. That's gonna hit your bottom line. So being able to go in and build this stuff out before anything happens and put those safety measures in place at moment one is important. But also keeping up that security analysis all the way through is also important. And remember, it's not going to get less, it's only going to get more. Regulations are going to increase, exploits are going to increase, vulnerabilities are going to increase. And you got to make sure that you have everything you need to defend yourself out there, people. It's your responsibility. It's your, to protect your customers, your consumers, your company's bottom line. I mean, in a lot of cases, somebody's life. This responsibility is heavy, and I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here, but I mean, think about it. You're in an industry that affects people's lives, and having the proper tool sets to make sure that you're fulfilling your responsibility and protecting them, that's all on you, and that's all on your team, and that's everybody's responsibility. This is just one of those scary number things I like to throw up there. Basically just talk about, the thing is that, the difference between automating and not automating. Money, money, money. Of course, you're going to have the people that look at the money aspect. I'll always look at the people aspect. Yeah, bottom line is important, but in my opinion, lives are more. So just a quick recap. We talked about binary management and why it's valuable. Talk about security vulnerability scanning. I mean, I could talk about this all day. License compliance and governments. The thing is that we have plenty of information on our site that can be applied to all. If you ever feel like, we'll give more information about this. We also have some upcoming webinars we'll be putting on our site in the future. We're going to also talk about release management and how that can be part of your SDLC lifecycle, air gapping, developer education. That was me being Debbie Downer and telling you all the bad stuff. And then, of course, last but not least, automation. I'm a big fan of automation. The reason why is because if you have all the proper metadata in place, you can use that information as a way for you to go through and automate the process. Take out that human factor, allow them to focus more on the compliance and the data that they receive, and less on the hand-holding, and less on promoting from one segment of your your gated process to the next. Making sure that you have accountability. You have that audit, ability to audit your releases if something does happen. And just be safe, people. Make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to hurt people, and just try to, like I said, automation can be a key factor in there. Don't get me wrong, I love humans, but at the same time, we're fallible. We all are. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we can offset what we can to something that's a little more logic driven sometimes. Anyway, that's me, and we're going to take some questions if there are any. I'm not sure.
We've got it.
But I want to also, before I finish, I want to just thank the people at DevOps.com for having me today, and I hope this has been informative.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we do have a couple questions that have come in. There's a few minutes, so if anybody else has a question for Bill, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit the questions, and we'll do as many as we can. So the first question is actually more of a statement, and hopefully you can comment on it. One challenge is growing GitOps, where devices are attaching directly rather than use artifacts. We debate if we should make an artifact or connect directly to Git. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, so my thoughts are interesting in this respect. I like separation. I'm a big believer of basically I like repositories that are isolated. I mean, if it works, you need to actually. All right, let's step back for a second before I really address that. I don't want it to sound like I'm addressing it based on who I am and my company, but it's really an evaluation of what works for you. Does it satisfy the requirements that you want to have? First of all, does it provide the access level control that you need for that download, to those devices? It depends on the device type too. Is also what kind of scope is it? Is it a global device? Do you have the infrastructure to support it, or does the infrastructure support the fact that some guy out in Kilimanjaro is trying to download that firmware update compared to a guy sitting, say, in New York City? There's a lot. This could be a larger debate. I don't know if we have time to get into it, but I would love to take it up if you wanted. Definitely it's a very interesting question, and I was actually a little sidelined by that.
All right. Well, I hope you guys have a spirited conversation about it offline later on.
That's very cool. I mean, my
yeah.
background, by the way, is just so you know, is the fact that I actually, I've actually spelled it correctly. That I actually come from an IoT background. That's always one of the things that we always had as a part of our, debate was, I can't find it. Where's I'm trying to find a place for people that want to try. Oh, it's not trial, it's try. That's right. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once and it's awful. All right, next question.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, this product question, does X-ray scan only OSS libraries or also my proprietary ones?
So you can actually have it scan your local repositories, and your local repositories is where you would store. And yes, you can write rules around that if you'd like also.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Okay, with CI/CD moving to configuration as code, how do you recommend enforcing all the security checks and automation is not missed? Is educating all developers a concern?
Yeah, so education is actually is part of it also. That's definitely part of it, but also sitting down and also looking at those processes. Actually, what I can always do is that I'll share an example. In this case, so if you guys can still see my screen, I'll show you one of my SDLC examples, right? So I mean, here's that container build, right? That I was showing you guys before, and instead of just killing the build directly, I mean, I can even show you if you wanted to my process level code for that. Here's my actual code that I actually utilize for that. In my case, like I said, I actually have a unit test that I'm performing, and like if you look here, I'm supplying more metadata back into the process, right? I'm actually using this function I created as part of my build down here to determine whether or not this thing is operational. But also as part of that, I've also made this part of a gating factor on whether or not I approve this or not. Now, instead of just doing a straight kill the build, what I'm actually doing is I'm printing out the results from that scan. And based on this metadata, I can make deterministic information on it to say, is it acceptable, right? So it's not just a black and white in this case. I can actually give you, shades of, basically a variance of how close I am to the market meeting the regulation itself. So being able to automate those processes, there is a manual step still involved that people should utilize, but in terms of automation, being able to have the right metadata to make the right decisions is key.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we're about 6 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's see. Do I have to manage X-ray in my dev team, or is it handled only or instead by my security office?
Wait, say that again? I'm sorry, I was breaking up for a second.
Yeah, no problem. Do I have to manage X-ray in my dev team, or is it handled only by or instead by my security office?
It depends, really. I mean, most of the times, the rules and creation might be handled by a security office, but that metadata should be actually, given to the developer, right? So they should have access to the data. But in terms of, it's like anything. If you ever worked in a clean room, right? you always need to be checked out on the way out, right? That's kind of like, make sure that you're not bringing anything with you or anything into the environment. So you should have the data presented to the developer so they make those conscious decisions. But most of the times it's actually handled by the security team. It depends on the regulated, who it is. So that's a very broad, open question. Because it could be varying different, people.
Okay. All right, great. I think we have time for one more question here. What type of reporting do you provide for when the audit man comes calling? So as they say, demonstrating compliance is often more difficult than being compliant.
Right. No, that's actually great. So yes, there is information. So like, if you were to go in and say you wanted to have that audit man, make sure that he, watches himself. You can give him as much information as possible. I'll show you an example. Actually, let's just go back to my other example, right? In this case, if I were to go in and click in here and go back in, and I wanted to, they said, hey, that container looks horrible. One of the things that you can do, and by the way, just so you know, we have a new version of our product coming out where this is all unified together in one user interface, as opposed to what you're seeing now. But being able to actually go, here you go, here's a violation report, here's all the licenses and all the security information. Let's print it out as a PDF and be able to show that to my that security guy who's lurking around the corner.
The audit man. Okay.
The audit
All
man
right. Right. The audit man cometh. All
and by the
right.
way, if anybody out there wants to actually try, we'll supply this URL as part of it. But if you want to go ahead, we have a great trial that will allow you to go in. We also, we have the ability for you to go in and try all the features I showed. And also too, we also have, if you type in JFrog Academy, we also have the JFrog Academy, which it's free to everybody. So if they want to learn about everything from DevOps and here's administration and utilization and overview, it's all free and ready to go for you.
Awesome. Awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the Q&A. And I know we did not get to everybody's questions, and I apologize for that. But please know that the folks at JFrog are getting a copy of all the questions. So I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline, as well as that spirited discussion about Artifactory or artifacts versus Git. So yeah. So,
yeah, IT is near and dear to my heart. So
yeah, awesome. All right, great. Well, I also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to listen to it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email later today that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go there and check it out. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. And while you're there, please take a look at some of the other webinars that we have upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be one or two that pique your interest. Bill Manning, thank you so much. Great presentation, lots of good stuff.
Thank you guys for having me, and I really appreciate it and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Awesome, awesome. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you.